And go ahead, Tom.
Well, welcome to Tom Talks, and welcome to our first Tom Talk of the spring. And this one isn't about a program that was near and dear to my heart for 13 years. We did 25 episodes of the Weekend of Restoration. I think many of you that are tuning in today were a participant in one or more of those programs. But if you're not, that's fine also, because you'll get to learn about what I think was an innovative program. And this is in some sense a review, as the title suggests. But for me, the important part about looking backward is considering what we accomplished and what it means going forward. For me, really, at my stage in my work in conservation, what I'm interested in is the future, and it's the growth of the conservation movement going forward. And how things like the Weekend of Restoration, or maybe quite unlike them, can contribute to that in the future. So that's really what I was trying to get at with this presentation. It's both to look back and to celebrate what we did and the people we did it with, but also looking forward to where conservation, I think, needs to grow into the future. So that's really where we're going with this. And as a part of this presentation, I have four people that helped me with essentially all of the Weekends of Restoration. And I'll just introduce them now. There's Greg Reisky. I think if you say something, your little thing will pop up, won't it? Or so people will see your face.
Well, I can say hello and see if that
Okay.
increases the size. But welcome, everybody. It's good to see you or be seen by you.
Okay. And there's Laura Petrick. And Laura was formerly, or for much of the time, well, she worked on all the weekends, but in person, she was an employee of the Conservation District. There's Tricia Bethke out there, an employee of the Morton Arboretum. And there's John Katzenmeyer, who I'm not sure who he's an employee of. John was a mysterious character, and we'll get to know him better as the presentation goes on. The question. So I was talking about the sort of duality of this presentation today. It's both about the Weekend of Restoration and it's about conservation. And where did it all start? And this is where the first Weekend of Restoration started. This is a scene in Glacial Park back in 2011. This would have been in the summer of 2011 as we were getting prepped for the Weekend of Restoration. Anyone who's been to the park, you're looking west. If you could turn to your right, you would see the bog. And to your left, you would be looking out over the prairie. So this is where we started. This is well, it used to be a wetland. It's at the time this photograph was taken as just a field of grass because it filled in with sediment when the prairie was a cornfield, and it was a cornfield for more than 100 years. So that's where the weekend starts. But if we're talking about, is that, I mean, in a sense, that's where it started, but in a sense, that's not where it started. It started where I started. And the story of any conservationist, me or any of the people that I've met and had the pleasure to work with over the years, where they started was all in a different place, but in many ways the same place. They started somewhere at some time in some place. And my parents treasured this little photograph. It was a little black and white photograph of me on the basement floor of our house in Baltimore, Maryland, when I was, I think, 2 years old in diapers, sitting on the floor playing in a little bucket of mud. That was where my bond with soil and conservation started, and it took a huge leap forward in the middle '60s when we lived in Nashville, Tennessee. And there was a little stream called 7 Mile Creek. This is not not I didn't have a camera at the time, so no photographs of that. This is 7 Mile Creek. They're doing a sort of restoration and conservation activities along 7 Mile Creek these days. And those were my Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn years, just wandering along the stream. That was a huge part of my life and my becoming a uh, conservationist eventually. Another huge leap forward in the 1980s when I was going to the College of DuPage. I'd been out of school and doing a variety of non-conservation activities, working blue collar jobs, yeah, all sorts of different things. And then I went back to school and I took this course in ecology with Russell Kerr at the College of DuPage, and it was truly a life-changing experience. We didn't just study ecology indoors. We went to the sand dunes at Lake Michigan. We went to quaking bogs in southern Michigan. We went to beech maple forests. We went to sand prairies in western Illinois. We went to caves with bats hanging from the ceilings. I guess somewhere in my imagination, I knew these things existed, but to actually be there was genuinely a life-changing experience for me. And so, and then we fast forward another roughly um, 10 years to the early 90s, and I'm working at the Morton Arboretum. And this is where I really discover teaching not as just something I can do, but something that means a lot to me. Those 6 years and working with literally thousands of students over those years. It was about this time I sort of changed from an ecologist who did teaching to a teacher. It was somewhere in this time. It was hard to know because I don't know that I ever really looked at myself closely to understand when that transformation happened. But teaching became not something I did; it became a calling. Um, and then all the way to the early 2000s when I'm working with a conservation district. This is getting closer to when where the weekend of restoration came from. Ed Collins, who was then the manager of the Department of Natural Resources, uh, and uh, and myself and the former editor of the journal Ecological Restoration, Bill Jordan, got together and we were thinking about kind of what the next step was in education. How can we push education forward? And we came up with this idea of a retreat, and and it ended up in its structure being similar to the weekend of restoration. And so that played a big role. I saw for the first time that getting people together and doing restoration activities as a little community and doing education at the same time had a sort of magical effect. It was something I never forgot after that. Now, this didn't last very long. At the time, we really didn't have much of an audience in adult continuing education, so we had to fold up the restoration retreat program and ran a series of workshops called the Ecological Restoration Certificate Program for a number of years, just to build up the base of people who look to the conservation district and to our program for meaningful educational activities. And that's really kind of what takes us to the weekend of restoration. And you know, this was my story, but it could be anyone's story. I mean, it's the only story I know because I'm only one human being. But anyone who's a conservationist today starts somewhere, starts with some introductory activity that piques their interest. Somewhere along the line, they find some sort of educational tie-in with that helps them along the way and gives them a credential perhaps to move on. They find that part of restoration, as I did with at the Morton Arboretum with teaching, that really means something very important to them, and then they sort of mature as a conservationist. Um, and that's the story of the weekend of restoration. It's my story, and I think it's the story of conservation. And I think when we talk about conservation, how to grow the movement going into the future, we need to remember these kinds of stories, not my story, but anyone's story of where did they come from? Every single person I know who's committed to conservation has a story. They didn't they didn't become a conservationist because they were fascinated by carbon sequestration. even though that's an important thing today, as we think about climate change, they didn't necessarily become a conservationist because they were concerned about the lack of pollinators for food crops, though many of us are concerned about that today. There's a story that links them to the movement, and it comes through nature and through the people around nature and in nature. That's how we all became conservationists. I think we need to think about that as we go forward, as conservation moves forward, and we think about what is a good or a better educational program. Um, and the question is how to build a better and a bigger conservation movement. As I said, this was my story. It involves work, it involves play, it involves education. Somehow, all these things have to come together in that next level of programs that will move the conservation movement forward. I ran across this slide as I was putting this presentation together, and I looked at that. I put this together immediately after the 2011 presentation, and I uh, looked at the 3 points: to inspire, enlighten, and motivate. And I thought, I've never actually said that any better. I think all three. Enlighten means educate, or in a sort of conventional sense of giving people a deeper understanding of what nature is, how it operates, why conservation is important today, and what we might do as a conservation activity. Inspiring people to inspiration to me is getting inside of a person's imagination and inspiring that imagination to see the possibilities. And motivating is getting people to actually get involved and to do things, not just to learn, not just to have an inspirational moment, but to get out and to start doing things and start doing things with other people. Because conservation, I think, is by and large a team activity. It's something we have to work on together to accomplish anything. Um, I just ran across this image putting this presentation together, and so many things about the ecological or the weekend of restoration. Um, it starts off as, to me, what was a fairly straightforward program of education, but then we explored so many different avenues of education and involvement, and we'll touch on just a few of those today, that it really became a vehicle for my imagination. And I think all four of the people you've met briefly to start with, as we tried to imagine what we could do next. What wild and crazy things could we do next to just explore the boundaries of what a program like this could be? We didn't want to repeat ourselves. And yeah, that became a really important part of the program to me, was that vehicle of experimentation. This is you know, what is really odd about the weekend of restoration, if you think of it next to what I had taught by that time, literally hundreds of workshops, sometimes one-day workshops, sometimes sequences of 3 or 4 workshops in a row to cover a topic like tree identification, uh, or a volunteer workday, clear a brush for a day or go out and collect seeds. Those last for a few hours. Uh, and so we're sort of used to that. You're asking for a certain chunk of people's time. You're giving them something, whether it's the satisfaction of a work opportunity or the satisfaction of a learning opportunity. You're asking for a little. You can only give about 3 hours worth of satisfaction with that. And from the very beginning, this was going to be a longer program that was trying to do more, and it's moving more toward the right hand side of this graph, that where the time investment is very high, and also the satisfaction possible is very high, because I think on that side, that sense of communal accomplishment that you get working with other people and taking on a really large project, that's what inspires conservationists. I think that's when and I wanted the goals of this program to shoot for that level of accomplishment and satisfaction, um, rather than to settle for not that I don't enjoy doing short workshops, I still do. But I wanted to shoot for those higher levels of involvement and satisfaction with a weekend of restoration. Um, and I'll just talk just a few minutes about that very first one because it remains special to me because it's after two or three, you fall into a routine and some of the things are easier to do than they were to start with. Starting from scratch and doing this essentially, at least organizationally, by myself that first time, it was an enormously difficult activity. Um, I was arranging the catering, I was doing the scheduling, I was involved in helping to make sure we were going to do our wetland restoration. I had arranged to get the permit to do the excavation of the wetland basin and all this. And I was uh, I was so stressed out by the time I got to the weekend. I thought that I was just about to explode. But on that first day in the Savannah room, the presentation room at Lost Valley Visitor Center in Glacial Park, when the first person walks through the door and you say hello and you shake their hand, all that is gone. And I just immediately switched into the mode of dealing with people and working on the weekend, and it was just an enormously satisfying weekend. One of the stresses building up to the weekend is the weather report was awful, and we were guaranteed severe thunderstorms both Saturday and Sunday, and I thought all that work was going to be a complete washout. Um, I don't want to forget these five young women who worked with me in that first event. These are 4 or 5 graduate students from the University of Michigan who who was a part of their master's project, came over and worked with me for that first weekend. They helped enormously in the marketing of the program and a lot of sessions of just thinking through what we were going to do. We'll eventually get to a sharing session at the end of the presentation today. That became a feature of each weekend of restoration, and that came out of conversations with these 5 young women sitting there in the Lost Valley Visitor Center, just thinking about the possibilities of the program. But so many other things evolved that eventually became a routine part of the program. It really came out of the collective minds of those 5 young women and myself. So I wanted to pay homage to their contribution. And that field of canary grass became Turtle Marsh, and this is the turtle for whom Turtle Marsh was named. This little guy crawled out of the bog about maybe 50 yards away and crawled over into Turtle Marsh Saturday night, and we found him in the middle of the excavation where we had already done quite a bit of work on Saturday and decided we would name the wetland Turtle Marsh. And Turtle Marsh looked like the Mojave Desert because it hadn't rained for weeks. And so I picked him up and put him back in the bog. But we'll get back to the condition of Turtle Marsh here in just a minute. In fact, right now, so we have this event, enormously satisfying event themed around, I think, wetland ecology, wetland soils, the plight of wetlands in society today. I did a number of PowerPoint presentations on those subjects as a part of the weekend. And we were dodging these awful rain clouds all weekend long. But we got through the entire program. Um, and I went to sleep that night back in my home in Libertyville, where I am today. And and that night the skies opened up. There was this pounding rain and thunder and lightning outside, and it was a surreal experience because I'd been dreading the rain all week, and we just restored a wetland that was bone dry. And so on Monday morning, I we had a department meeting that morning at 8 o'clock, and when I got to the park, I literally ran out there um, because I had to see what had happened. And there was a little pool of water in that wetland, and for the first time in 100 years, there was a little pool of water in what would now be Turtle Marsh, and the satisfaction at that moment was enormous. Things like that just kind of trigger your imagination and your gratitude for all the people and effort that went into it. Um, I wanted to talk just for a moment about the the work we did out there because the work for me I'm a teacher, and education was always going to be part of the weekend of restoration. Um, but I wanted that community of people to come together around a conservation activity. And so we did many different things. We planted, I think, like 6,000 trees. Uh, we built stream riffles for a couple of weekends. We cleared some brush on a weekend. So we did a number of different things. And the activity wasn't as important to me as that we all took on the activity as a group, and that there was a project ahead of us, a big project ahead of us, and that we would do it as a group, accomplish it as a group, and then be able to look back on it when we were done and see the fruits of our labor. So that was the important thing um, to me. And these were just some of the people that were involved in those 25 different weekends of restoration. Our COVID restorations, and everyone's wearing a mask. But the education was always a huge part of it to me because I was a teacher, and I just wanted to take a moment to talk about anyone who's been in a class with me, whether it's a workshop or at a weekend of restoration. I never actually articulated this sort of the structure of how I teach natural history, but I wanted to talk about it for just a minute today. There are two ways. Natural history is basically using natural science as the foundation of your teaching. But science in its pure form is really trying to understand processes in nature. So, this picture up here in the upper left of the screen is about glacial movement, about how if you pile up ice and snow more than about 100 meters thick, ice starts to flow, which it doesn't in ice cubes in your drink. It seems like a brittle solid, but that's how glaciers move. But that doesn't really tell you about anything about Illinois, just understanding the principles of glacial movement. Then you have to put all those glaciers together into an ice age. You have to look at how glaciers moved and where they moved to and how they receded and in what sequence they receded and what parts of the county where moraines were built. You have to tell a story. You have to take all of those understandings of process, which is an important part. That's the sort of basic science part of natural history teaching. And then you have to build it into a story. People understand stories. Stories tell you about the real world. As I told you a little mini story about the site of the weekend of restoration, which was originally a wetland that filled in with sediment. That's a story. It's a story about erosion, deposition, a farming era, crops surrounding a little wetland basin, and the wetland basin eventually disappears under the sediment. And then we as restorationists in that weekend became a part of the story of Turtle Marsh in rebuilding the wetland again. Um, but there's a part of there's an important part of conservation and education that really isn't 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 really covered by that discussion of scientific process or even a narrative that builds an understanding of place. It's about the people. It's about the people who do the science. It's about people who do the conservation and do the restoration activity. What inspired them? Where did they come from? What was their background? What were the barriers in their way? All of these sorts of things are, to me, are fundamental parts of the story of conservation that we have to get out there, that we have to teach people to understand that they're a part of that human story of conservation. And to do that, we took a sort of performative approach to some of the things we did. This is where we get to some of those. Well, at the time, now it seems pretty normal to me because we did this several times, and we'll talk about a few of these today. But at the time, it seemed like kind of a wild and crazy idea. And we did a little play. This is a play that celebrated conservation in the early decades of the 20th century. And uh, Greg Reisky was our director for that play. And so I want to hand this over to Greg to talk just a little bit about the play and about really what you think, Greg. What did this play really have to tell us as sort of early 20th, 21st century conservationists about where conservation was in the early 20th century and how they thought about themselves? Take it away, Greg.
Well, thank you, Tom. I think it's important to recognize that conservation is grounded in history. And I think this play was an excellent demonstration of that. And the script came to me originally from Laurel Ross, who was a volunteer at the time with the North Branch volunteer group. This was back in the 1990s. And, she had come across this script and thought it was so relevant to what we were doing in ecological restoration at that time, and thought it would just be a wonderful thing to be able to put this on somehow. And the history of the play itself is relevant. It was written by a Chicago playwright by the name of Kenneth Sawyer Goodman. And if you've heard of the Goodman Theater, I mean, that theater was named for Kenneth Sawyer Goodman. He was well known around the turn of the 20th century. The play was commissioned by a grassroots member organization called Friends of Our Native Landscape. And this was, again, the 1910s. There were just, a couple of national parks had been established. The first state park in Illinois at Starved Rock had just been established. And the Friends group, the Friends of Our Native Landscape, wanted to promote the preservation, the protection of these natural areas for the use of the community and for the benefit of wildlife and all of the other conservation themed purposes. So this was 100 years ago, and Jens Jensen, the well-known Chicago landscape architect, was one of the members of the Friends, and he had approached Goodman and asked him if he would write a play that would help promote the preservation of these natural areas. So the story of the play is pretty simple. I mean, it's a short piece. It opens with a Native American who's rather forlorn. He's being expelled from their ancient homeland. This is after the Black Hawk Wars, when the Native Americans were forced west of the Mississippi. So he is on his way out of Illinois, and forlorn for that. And he encounters a magical spirit of nature who's presented as a faun, like the panpipes and the cloven hooves and all that. But a god or goddess of nature who is also rather forlorn. She's seeking friends. So this goddess is looking for friends. And again, friends of our native landscape. This all ties together. So there's nothing she can do for this Native American. She blesses his way and he exits. And she next encounters a pioneer settler who is there to carve out a living out of the wild with axe and gun. He has no interest whatsoever in connecting to the spirit of nature. So once again, she is left friendless as he moves on his way to stake a claim. So then the play shifts from the 1830s, 40s to the 1870s. And this goddess, this nature goddess, encounters a builder of roads and towns, an industrialist. It's the 1870s. He just wants to earn a fortune off the land, open it up to coal and water power, put in the railroads and just develop everything, turn it into cornfields. And he has no patience at all for this goddess and just brushes her off, and she is once again left forlorn until the final character shows up in the modern day, which would have been the 1910s. We played it, of course, in the 2010s. But the final character who arrives is simply a friend. So this friendless goddess finally meets someone who cares about nature, wants to protect the natural environment. And, the story is one of, how humans have extracted from the natural environment, how they've ignored it, how they've abused it, and eventually come to appreciate it. So the play was first performed in 1913. So when we presented it in 2013, it was the centennial of the debut of the play, which I thought was really timely. And the Friends group originally put on this play, mounted a production every year up until World War II. And every year their annual meeting would be in a different location that they felt was worthy of protection. So it was to call attention to this natural area and get people involved in petitioning the government or other owners of the property to protect it. So it was an excellent opportunity to see the trajectory of land use in Illinois and the development of the conservation movement around the turn of the century. So that's it.
Great. I'm always amazed when I look, particularly the Indiana Dunes scenes here of literally thousands of people coming down on the train from Chicago to the dunes for this giant party.
Right. And they're dressed in ties and waistcoats, and the women are in flowing dresses, and there's sand in their shoes.
And it would be very hard to miss it. It's the difference in society then between then and now. It's maybe the difference in where the conservation movement was. It was brand new. And perhaps because of its newness, it was intriguing to people. Yeah, it's a scene I would love to duplicate today. It might be very hard to find a way to get thousands of modern people into the same spot to preserve the dunes, or maybe not. Maybe we just haven't tried hard enough yet. We our second, I guess this would be our second attempt at a performative approach to talking about conservation was in 2017. We for that year we had a subject of our theme for the year was women in conservation. And in the fall program, we focused in on a particularly important figure in the Chicago area in the conservation movement, and that was a woman named May Tilgard Watts, who worked at the Morton Arboretum in the 40s and 50s. And in the fall, we would go on to sort of bring it up to the present tense and talk about women in conservation today. But for the fall, being a teacher myself, I've always felt that teaching never gets quite the credit in the conservation movement it deserves. And I really wanted to celebrate May Watts, but May Watts, while she was an incredibly important figure within the Arboretum, I worked at the Arboretum from 1990 to 1996, and I was in fact the naturalist there. I was only the third naturalist in the Arboretum, May Watts being the first. And everywhere I went and every time I opened a drawer, there was May Watts. And I was reminded of May Watts by people and by events and by things on the wall everywhere. You scratched the surface at the Morton Arboretum in those days, and May Watts was right there. And I wanted to bring her to life, as opposed to just talk about her and do a sort of biographical presentation. I wanted to bring her to life. So what we did was I wrote a little play about her. I'm not Kenneth Sawyer Goodman by any stretch, but we wrote a little play about her and about her mentor, Henry Coles, who is the center figure in the screen right now, who was a professor at the University of Chicago. May Watts worked as a teacher during the school year, and in her summers went and was a student of Henry Coles. And so, yeah, and to play May Watts, Trisha Bethke became our star for the presentation. I just want to bring Tricia in at this point, and I know Tricia, and I assume we had already the subject of May Watts had come up many times by the time we came up with this idea in 2017. But I wonder what Tricia, uh, how she felt playing this sort of monumental figure at the Arboretum, but really more about what she learned about May Watts. And again, perhaps about the conservation movement at the time or about her relationship with Henry Coles.
Thanks, Tom. I should say Henry, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Henry. I'll be Henry just for the next few minutes.
yeah, just for the next few minutes. No, your play gave life to my hero. She was my mentor, and it was an honor to speak her words, really. I thought your lens was very keen. I know you did a lot of research and kind of looked at Coles and what he was doing, and then May Watts and kind of how they would have interacted. For me, what I learned is that she is, as Greg mentioned, like conservation is founded in history, right? And so she took a very historical perspective on conservation and then put her own lens, if you will, on it. And she empowered people. She was a gatherer. People, you're talking about, going out to the dunes and there were thousands of people. Well, people would come out from the city. They would walk from the train station to the Morton Arboretum, and then they would walk out to the field and they would spend the whole day in the field with her. And she was magical. And I think that what is most interesting is that she never gave up. She really, truly believed in Cole's succession theory. She had beech trees planted at the Arboretum thinking that eventually it was going to convert over. I had the good fortune of working at the Morton Arboretum and seeing those beech trees and putting my hands on top of it. So I was motivated not only by her works and by your works, Tom. When I was in adult education, every door I opened, I saw your work. So it's a rolling theme here. I think that she is inspirational, even in the face of adversity. And I think what's most important in her legacy is the idea of empowering people to care enough about our communities and to do whatever it is in the face of adversity, right? She was older, she was a mother, she was a naturalist, she was an artist. I mean, she did all of this very late in life and in many ways very untraditional role. And so that was fun to learn a little bit more about that. It was also fun to explore the kind of the playfulness of their relationship. Coles, I mean, she really truly looked up to and admired Henry Chandler Coles. And it was clear that in your writing you were able to capture that. So it was an honor. And I think after she left the Arboretum, she left not on her own terms necessarily, but she went on to create the Prairie Path. And again, empowered people to stand up to bulldozers and to work together to connect communities and connect nature and connect people to nature. And I think that, in a very short play, you were able to capture a lot of that. So it was a real honor, Tom, to join you in this journey.
I that picture of Henry Coles, I read a lot of his work, but a lot of his scientific work doesn't capture his sense of humor. And I look at that picture and I tried to write that person
Yeah.
into the script, the person who was just always saw the humorous side of things. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I said I thought education often seems to play a weak, third sister to science and management in conservation and ecological restoration. And I say that because May Watts was an enormously influential teacher. In the 1990s, I met a number of people just a little bit older than myself who actually were in the classroom when May Watts was teaching. And how great a teacher she was, how inspiring she was, and you lose sight of the fact that the students of May Watts became central to the conservation and ecological restoration movement that starts in the 1980s. And then that's really when that gets going. And the adults at that time, the people who were doing that, were a part of that generation, many of whom had been in May Watts' classroom. So that her role, I mean, she is the student of Henry Coles, who was there at the beginning of ecology in the 1890s. And May Watts is preparing people. She doesn't know that. She doesn't see that in the future when she's teaching, but her students then become central to that beginning of the ecological restoration conservation movement of the 1980s. So this is the part of that story we're trying to get across here. This story, conservation, just doesn't happen because of some facts in a textbook. It happens because of people talking to other people and inspiring other people, just as Coles inspired Watts and Watts inspired thousands of people who are in her classrooms.
Well said.
Um, the I thought, looking back on it, um, I said we did some pretty wild and crazy things in the weekend, and this I don't think was as difficult as the Watts Coles play, but it was probably on the surface more off base and more crazy than most other things there. We did a few readings. We had themed 4 consecutive weekends of restoration on the at least in pre-Socratic Greek idea of the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Um, and with the fire presentation, yes, I did some presentations about fire, sort of natural history presentations. My prescribed burn outfit and talked about prescribed burning and how we did it and where we did it and why we did it. I talked about native peoples and their use of fire in the landscape that's the sort of backdrop which makes fire important as a management tool today. So I did those sort of conventional things, but I also wanted something to really evoke the emotional side of fire and its place in culture. Um, and so and I've been a huge fan of the book Moby Dick for many years. I've gone through it many times. Both as an adventure story, as a book of philosophy, as all sorts of things you can get out of Moby Dick. And I could remember these scenes, these fire scenes, and how they raised the hair on the back of my neck when I would listen to the tapes of it or read it. And so I used those to try to evoke some of that emotional side of fire. So in the upper right hand corner of the screen is me playing Ahab. Maybe the only time in my life I'll get to play the central figure of the book. And he's a megalomaniac who is completely obsessed with killing the white whale. And in this scene that we're enacting there, that's the harpoon. It's actually a dandelion puller that I put a harpoon head on. And he's forging and then tempering the steel. And to temper the steel, he has his harpooneers, the three men who will throw the harpoon, come over, and they each cut themselves, and they use the blood to temper the harpoon. And he screams out, "This is not in the name of the Father, but in the name of the devil." Those sorts of scenes, which I think, did a pretty good job. And I was trying to evoke that emotional side of fire that really is everywhere in Western culture. I mean, if you take, for instance, the awful fires in California, um, not that long ago, and the news reports every day for several weeks, um, how often, how much of those news reports were about the huge management mistake that led to the fires? that we had suppressed fires in those ecosystems for so long that they were then a tinderbox just waiting to explode, and how much of it instead was on, right? I mean, importantly, it was on the brave firefighters who were confronting the fire. It was on the loss of life and the loss of property. But it was the loss of life and property that dominated the news. Fire as a huge negative effect, and not on the role of fire, what could have been the role of fire in preventing those disastrous fires by the proper use of prescribed fire. So, um, and if you look at the history of conservation, if you go back to Thomas Jefferson understood that native peoples used fire to create what he called balds or bare spots in the forest in the eastern United States. And he understood native people's use of fire in doing that. But by the time the 1890s, when conservation is or ecology is born as a science at the time of Henry Coles, fire completely disappears as a creative force, and it becomes a destructive thing that opposes nature's the natural movement of nature is progressive, moving forward to higher and higher states of vegetation, and fire is a regressive act that pushes nature backward, and nature has to recover from fire. It's not a creative element at all. Even in those early years in the first decade of the 20th century, fire was thought to be destructive even of prairies and longleaf pine forests in the southeast, ecosystems that we know today are totally dependent on fire. So it was trying to evoke that fear and the anxiety that our culture feels toward fire that we did this little play. Again, with the Weekend of Restoration, we were just trying to do things that seemed wild and crazy to start with to just see how it worked. And I was actually rather proud of this one. And then one weekend, I've forgotten the year of this one now. I think it was 16, I think. So the year before the fire weekend, we chose the Civilian Conservation Corps. Actually, this was an old idea. I had actually wanted to do with the old restoration retreat program of the early 2000s, was starting to plan a Civilian Conservation Corps themed retreat, and I just didn't get any people to sign up for it, so we had to can it. And I just put this in my back pocket, but always wanted to come back to it because the Civilian Conservation Corps is this incredibly important part of the history of conservation. During the Great Depression, the President Franklin Roosevelt is creating all sorts of government programs, trying to put people back to work, trying to get the economy back on its feet. And so he creates the Civilian Conservation Corps, which pays young men $1 a day. Given the fact that they were all unemployed, that's a lot of money. Pays them $1 a day to work in conservation activities and establish hundreds of different Conservation Corps camps across the nation, quite a few of which are in Illinois. Starved Rock State Park has an old conservation Corps camp. And so we tried to recreate a camp atmosphere. This became Camp Nippersink. Uh, in the one of the pictures there shows the 1920s, 30s candy store that our Sandy Rogers, one of the employees of the Conservation District, created. We had I paid people with conservation bucks. I came up with my own money. We did all sorts of wonderful things, but I really want to bring in John and Laura to talk about what they remember from the Conservation Corps themed weekend.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I actually had a manila folder specifically for that weekend, and so I dug it out, excuse me, and I found some artifacts that really brought back memories, a certificate of discharge, a pay voucher, which you can actually see pictured in the middle of the screen there, and some trivia tidbits. And I want to just share 3 of them because a lot of these things that we did had some value. Matter of fact, all of them that we did had some value to them, but some of them were more educational in nature. And I'm going to share 3 of them, and then I have a question, a true-false question. The first bit of trivia, though, says Roosevelt established the CCC in 1933 in part to serve as a form of conservation, hence the name, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And it also says here that the CCC men were the forefathers of those who pioneered the modern environmental movement, which tells me that what took place almost 100 years ago lives on today. And then the third bit of trivia here, the CC was a healed a man, and maybe more importantly, healed the land. So a lot of what we did that weekend instilled those ideas and thoughts, I think, in us. And what really impressed me, Tom, you mentioned earlier that part of our own 25 weekends, we planted roughly 6,000 trees. So this is a true-false question. In the years that the CC existed, the men, and it was a men's corps, planted 3 billion trees. Is that true or false? You don't have to answer out loud, but if in your own mind think that's true or false. And the answer is sort of a given. Yes, they planted 3 billion trees, among other things. So that's what really impressed me. And at the bottom of that pay voucher, in the very middle of the picture, there's a quote by the president. I'll read it from my sheet here, my pay voucher, just to summarize my impressions of that weekend. It says, "It is my belief that what is being accomplished will conserve our natural resources, create future national wealth, and prove of moral and spiritual value, not only to those of you who are taking part, but for the rest of the country as well." And it's signed by the president. And, you know, I know that you put a lot of effort, a lot of people put a lot of effort in that weekend, and it was just so unique, transposed back in time. And we had our attire, I forget the name of the hat. One of you might, Lord, I don't know who remembers. Tom, do you remember what those hats are called again?
I just call them little floppy hats, but I think they have a different
Little
name.
floppy, yeah, that's what I call them too, little floppy hats. So with that being
If I
said, Laura,
may,
if you want to.
we called them boonie hats.
Boonie hats,
Boonie,
okay.
that's what it is, boonie. I knew it was something special, a boonie hat. Laura, I've asked that you maybe share some of your thoughts. I think you're muted right now, just in case you weren't aware. I think you're still muted.
Okay. Part of the fun that I had with this particular event, it was the immersive experience, because there was a familiar structure in terms of, you know, we had the evening, we had different lectures, different introduction to things, but we became part of the whole experience ourselves in a more profound way, because we each had our own role in it. And so you can see by some of the pictures there, the lineup, we all had to do roll call. We were doing some of the very same similar tasks associated with the Civilian Conservation Corps. It was introducing us to a period of time, methodology related to conservation that then we could add into our background knowledge for how we do conservation today. One of the things I found really interesting about it, because part of it, there was a movie that we were watching, and this was a part of conservation I was mildly aware of. I'd heard of CCC, but I really didn't understand what it was. So I had a fuller picture. When I've gone to other places, I now see and hear about the impact that this particular public program and movement had on other places. I was actually really surprised to find out why this was successful or what it accomplished
in those, what was it, 3 billion trees. I was really surprised at how much what we had done to our environment in order for this to be an actual program. How many trees we had, how we'd changed our environment and kind of devastated a lot of places. So that was one of the things where it was a profound, not only just good social experience, but profound understanding related to conservation itself.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, for me, I would say that when we put this on, I mean, you could do this halfway, but we tried to go as far as we could. I can remember finding the original forms that a young man would sign up for the Civilian Conservation Corps and sort of copying those and changing them just enough to remove the gender specific language and put the conservation district's logo on there. We and a discharge certificate that was the same. We and I think it was John that mentioned, you know, this is about stories. This is, you know, this is the early decades of the 20th century. The Mask, the Beauty of the Wild, is about conservation in the teens. Now we're moving up into the 1930s and in the era of the Great Depression, and conservation is quite different. This is another part of the story of conservation that we're a part of today, and we're just looking to see what comes next. So this was yeah, we had reveille in the morning. You can see Greg there marching back and forth, taking a look at the recruits. We did all sorts of fun things and tried to stay in character. I had to borrow that wonderful campaign hat for the weekend. I got to get one myself. Those are nice hats. I like hats. So yeah, it was a wonderful weekend, very immersive experience, I think, for all of us. And we really worked at so that all the participants felt like they were in a camp that weekend. I mean, to me, to make something like that work, you really have to work at it. One of the things, you know, this um, we this would have been in 2020, spring of 2023 and 2024. Jackie had made connections with Trickster Cultural Center in Schaumburg, Illinois, centered around Native American culture and art. And we came up with the idea that they would come out and we would partner with them for a weekend of restoration. And the important thing for me in this weekend is that as an ecologist, from the early 90s and the early weeks at the Arboretum and becoming aware of the critical role of Native peoples in their use of fire and other cultural practices in shaping the vegetation of that we think of as nature. That's the pre-European settlement vegetation of Illinois. I mean, I had included that in as I talked about ecology as sort of a part of the story of the land and the relationship between people and land that was really true for the at least 12, 13,000 years before Europeans came to the area. But I'd always talked about Native people in the past tense. I mean, I raised my hand guilty of that. I really didn't talk about them in their present tense. And there's actually a large Native American community that lives in the Chicago area. And we made contact with them. We invited them out to the weekend, really to allow them to celebrate their culture and for us to at least share in that a little bit. I mean, I think our relationship with Native peoples today of course, I'm coloring it by what's happened in the last few years with a conservation district. I think it's conservationists like to talk about land ethics and about our connection to the landscape. And in talking about that direct connection to the landscape, we often leave the native people out that were here before us, and that we're we need to include them in that story as conservationists. And that's a difficult, troubling thing to do, because the relationship between the two societies was not a good relationship, and remains not a terribly good relationship today, but it's something we can fix as we move forward. So, I mean, to me, I think where we are today is in a trust building relationship. I think these 2 weekends we did with Trickster were a part of a trust building relationship. Hopefully, um, just being a small part. I mean, we have Trickster. Trickster is now one of our routine partners in a number of events every year. That to me shows that we're developing a trusting relationship with Trickster. That's just a little part of what needs to happen as a society as we move forward, that Native peoples have to become a part of our relationship to the land and part of how we think about conservation, and not to leave them out of that picture. So that's kind of what I remember from those weekends, and what I think we achieved in those weekends. This John was a part of all the weekends, really. I didn't schedule him as a part of the very first weekend because I didn't know who he was. But in right at the end, we'll talk about our sharing session that we would close each weekend with here in just a minute. But during that sharing session, he put on, well, I will only call it a little show, and everyone in the room was delighted and laughing. And I was thinking to myself, I couldn't pay this guy to do a better job for the weekend of restoration that I had put together. So that was my introduction to John, really, that weekend, and it lasted for all the weekends of restoration. So I want to bring him on right now just to talk a little bit about some of the wild and crazy things we did. I don't know where to start. You can see truffula trees that I guess come from Dr. Seuss. You can see lightsabers. I definitely remember the lightsabers, balloons all over the floor, just all sorts of crazy things we did, educational things. And I just wanted to, I don't know exactly what question to ask, but where did you look for ideas to do some of this stuff, John? Or do you just do this stuff all the time and you just happen to do it at the weekend for us?
Thanks, Tom. I've heard it said that I'm the guy with the goofy games and activities. There's probably some truth to that. But just to give you a little background information, I 24 of the weekends, and one of the first ones I approached Tom. I just, for whatever reason, decided I'd like to run an activity, and he was receptive to the idea. And in the end, you do the math, I think I did about 50 plus activities over the course of the last 25 weekends. And to answer Tom's question, some of the basic principles I tried to adhere to when I planned my activities, in other words, the thoughts behind my activities, I try to make them fun and engaging and relevant and educational. I mean, do people want to participate, be actively involved? Do they have a purpose? And, what would be the takeaway? What's the lesson learned by the participants? Something else that was important to me, are they topical? Are they aligned with the theme or the themes of the weekend? Are they interactive, entertaining, and quick and easy? There's no sitting allowed when I was doing the activities, and hopefully people would enjoy them, and they'd be quick and they'd be over and done with before you knew it. And it wouldn't take a lot of thought on the participants' part. And then all important, of course, was variety for me. Mix of activities, whether they're seated or they're standing or they're moving, doing the activities. And I also used as another guide to use the different senses. I'm looking at my notes here. Touch and feel and hearing and seeing and movement, all of the kinesthetic things that went on. As an example, we had one weekend was about the Ice Age and the glaciers, Glacial Park being, of course, a beautiful example of that time in history. And I have these little wind-up toys, and I'm like, what can I do with that? So I got out my ice trays and put them in ice, and I froze them. And then the activity ended up being where people had to grab the ice cubes, and the things that were frozen in them were a little murky looking, but I had a supplemental like handout that they had to choose from the list which item might be in there. Was it a frog or who knows what? And that was feel. I've used marbles, balloons, Play-Doh animals. It was a weekend where we had a theme of extinction, and we created these Play-Doh animals, which turned out pretty cool. And then we put them in our time capsule. More recently, on our last weekend of activity, weekend of restoration, the activity was a nighttime geocaching event. So they're out there in the dark, feeling their feet on the ground, looking for the caches, hearing things. Music was prevalent in my activity, sing-alongs, drumming, things like that, seeing things, lots of props, the truffle of trees, that we had a forest for a scavenger hunt outdoors, movement, board races, fly swatters, Nerf guns, these huge life-size mouse traps made out of laundry baskets, sort of to that game mousetrap. And then there's the dynamic in the activities. Some of them where you had to do it on your own kind of thing. Some were partners, some were small groups, some were large groups, some were team, half and half of the group, mixing them up. And the location, some were on the floor. Sometimes there were things hanging from the ceiling, things fastened to the walls. We used tables, chairs at times, indoor, outdoor. But the thing that always tied it all together, and probably paramount to everything else, is what's the relevance behind it? What's the takeaway, and is it going to be enjoyable? And all that being said, I got to say, in retrospect, all the weekenders were really awesome. Their unconditional willingness to indulge me and try out something maybe out of their comfort zone. And most of them went pretty well. There were a couple of flops, and they fell flat. But they're always winners. We're all winners in the end, and we even prizes. And so people would come up to me, hey, John, what do you got planned for this weekend? And I'm like, gosh, I got to figure that one out. So that's how it all sort of unfolded. And I guess my career in the classroom maybe helped a little bit too. It was probably one of the, as a teenager, even as an undergraduate, I really had no desire, nor did I aspire to go into education. And then I ended up making a career of it. And when Tom said yes to me, that, sure, John, why don't you try, unknown to what it would be like, he took a gamble and he said, well, let's give it a try. And things just flourished from there. And that's how it all sort of came to be. And so that's sort of a little summary of a lot of what was going on in my head. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, John. What I want to emphasize here as we've gone through this presentation is that if you think of the possibilities of the giant room, we tried to explore every crack and crevice in the room and open every closet door and poked our head out of every window to try to see what can we do? What can we try? How can we? I take my work as a teacher, as a conservationist, as a scientist, as an ecologist. I take that work very seriously, but I try not to take myself that seriously. Like you get boring if you take yourself too seriously. And I wanted to have the same thing happening with this program. That the program would be fun. It would be wild. It would explore so many different dimensions, so many different possibilities that it might not every one of them work, but we wouldn't walk away from it, taking ourselves too seriously and standing there saying scientific things or sort of very serious things about conservation only. We certainly did that a lot, and maybe me a little bit too much, but I wanted to try as many things as possible, to include as many different people out there and the different sensibilities and learning styles, and to bring them into the group as a part of the group, as we went forward. So that's it. It was fun, but there was also a method to the madness, of using this variety of activities to involve people. So where does conservation start? Again, the left-hand side of the screen is just me, but it could be anyone. It could be anyone's story. There's a place where you get a first inkling. There are experiences in nature as a child. There is somewhere along in your educational history, whether formal or informal, that suddenly you get in touch with this world of knowledge and things that you just really never knew existed. Then there's trying it out. There's trying to find your place in a conservation community and what you want to do. I mean, John said he never thought of himself as being a teacher. Frankly, uh, the the 25-year-old Tom Simpson would have laughed in your face had you said I was going to be a teacher. I was a shy kid. I hated public speaking. I just froze every time I got up in front of a group. I just didn't want to do anything to do with it. But somewhere in my education working, initially, when I went back to school, I was just a year, or well, I was more than a year or two ahead, but I was just a little bit ahead in my plan ID from other students. And so they asked me for help, and I started helping them and realized how satisfying that felt to help them. And that went into being a teaching assistant, and that went into being a teacher. And I sort of discovered myself as a part of discovering conservation. I discovered a part of myself I never knew existed, Frank, and that's the deep satisfaction of helping people understand initially factual things about how to identify a white oak tree, but then connecting them to important movements like the conservation movement and trying to articulate to them why it's important and what role they can play. And this is where we're going to put in a little word cloud activity of John. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, and John is going to do a little activity with you, the viewer.
Thank you, Tom. This is also, if I invite you to participate in this, all you need is a browser window or your phone, and you need to go to menti.com if you're in your browser window. Can you see the screen right now where it says menti.com?
Not yet. You'll need to share your screen.
All right. Thank you. Here we go. One moment, please.
There it is.
There you
We see
go.
your screen and the Menti.
So you
Perfect.
can put the address menti.com in your browser, and then it'll ask for an 8-digit number, or you can actually use your smartphone and scan the QR code on the screen, and you'll come to a page and put in 49872930. And what this has meant is just to get a quick insight into all our participants today in this Tom Talk, our personal thoughts and feelings, sort of a summary about what you heard today, your experiences, if you were actually a participant in a weekend of restoration. And it'll be real-time results. There's just one word cloud we'll be doing. I'm just waiting to give you a moment to get logged into this, menti.com, and to enter those 8 digits or scan the QR code and do the same thing, enter those 8 digits. And it'll be fun to see how everybody responds. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. And our last weekend of restoration was, the theme was relationships. And so I took the quote that Tom had come up with, and I just want to break it down into 4 components. It says here, it's about relationships. Restoration isn't a goal or something you finish. It's a caring relationship you live in. The goal is a relationship. And that was very fitting for our last weekend restoration. So going now to our interactive activity, here there is a question and you get to respond using 3 different words. It should be evident on your phone or on your screen. It says here, in a word, you'll be entering 3 different words in 3 different boxes. Please describe your impressions of the weekend of restoration based on your own experiences, if you participated in 1 or more of the 25, or based on what you heard in today's presentation. And I have responding turned off right now because as you guys are entering your 3 words, and then you'll hit submit, and what's going to happen is all our words will appear on the screen here, and some will be larger than others, and I'll explain why. So I'm going to let the responses show up here. So I'm going to turn this off. Oops, try it again. And if you want to type in your 3 words, your impressions, I can see some popping up already. And as they get entered, you can see right in the middle right now is the word fun. And the reason being more than one person said fun. And then comes connection, and more than one person entered connection, inspiring. So it's a visual representation of our thoughts here. And I just thought it'd be sort of a fun way to involve our participants today. I'm not going to read each one of these, but I see some there that says learning, friendship, teamwork, new friends, interesting. It's a reflective experience. It's empowering. Fun seems to be the word of choice here. A lot of people, and I think that's sort of cool that a lot of people found the weekend based on their own experience to be fun and also based on what they heard today. And the second, I would say, highest response is it was a connection perhaps to nature or perhaps to a common cause. I'm not going to interpret all of these. You can read them. Informative, caring, community, philosophical, and unique. So thank you for participating in that. I'd like to share one more slide. I don't know if Tom or anybody else that is part of our panel would like to say a word on this. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to our last slide here.
I'm actually very pleased with the words that are there. I think fun is where it starts. That's why people come, and it was obvious in the weekends when you looked at people's faces, in particular when they were working with each other or when they were, in one of your activities, how much fun they were having. So yeah, that rings true.
I just saw the word grateful up there too. That's interesting. I guess I do feel grateful in many ways. I learned a lot, and I was grateful that I got to be outdoors and have that camaraderie and make friends, some lifelong friends. People on our panel today are some of my best environmentalist friends and personal friends, I guess you could say. All right, last slide. This was actually also from one of the weekends of restoration. You can see the date there, about 11 years ago. It was a spring weekend, and the theme was our sense of place. And being at Glacial Park, most of our weekends were at Glacial Park. Some were off-site, but most were there. And you're probably familiar with this quote, but I do like to share it. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And that's from the Lorax, although I believe it was the Onceler who said that, one of the characters in the book. So that is the end of the word cloud and the sharing of that activity. Back to you, Tom.
Okay. And get to the next. There we go. Well, I wanted to finish with is what we called a sharing activity. You know, I introduced you to the four or five young women who came from the University of Michigan. And when we were thinking about activities, one of them suggested this, and I immediately thought, boy, that's not a good idea. If we do that, what's going to happen is that I'll ask for people to share, and everyone will sort of feel very uncomfortable and quiet, and they'll sort of stare at the ground or at the opposing wall. And then I'll say something and then I'll say, okay, well, let's get up and go outside. So I really didn't think it was going to work. But we did it because I wanted to, honor the young women I was working with. They felt it was going to work, so we did it. And so, an activity like that always starts off slow. There has to be a first person to say something. I don't remember whether I was first or someone else just open up their mouth. But as soon as one person says something, then another person shares something, and then another person, and then another person, and then another person. It ended up, I think we started after breakfast, and I think I sort of had to call it off after about an hour and a half of sharing because it was just so rewarding. Uh, and that, to me, that was a part of that was indicative of the magic of the weekend, because that wouldn't have happened had we done that on Friday evening when we first got together, because people didn't know each other. They didn't trust each other. But when you work with people, when they have to hand you the rake, or you have to pick up the hay bale for them, or you have to help them do something, or they help you do something, it develops enough of a layer of trust that then you're ready to share something important and meaningful to you in those final minutes or final hours of the weekend. And so it ended up being this incredibly rewarding thing that I look forward to each and every weekend. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask my four colleagues and helpers through all the weekends of restoration to share what they would like to share today, and then I'll have something to say at the end.
I can go first.
Okay.
Since I'm usually not prepared during the weekends, I'm always last. And this is in the spirit of May Tile Guard Walks. It's called We Belong. We are not above the meadow. We are wind, we are rain, the hush of a leaf on forest floor, the roots that drink again. Community is more than people. It's stone and seed and wing. To care for the earth is to listen to every living thing.
Well, I can go next. I've selected a short poem that is seasonally appropriate here in the final days of April. The poem is called Spring, and it was written by Edna St. Vincent Millay. To what purpose, April, do you return again? Beauty is not enough. You can no longer quiet me with the redness of little leaves opening stickily. I know what I know. The sun is hot on my neck as I observe the spikes of the crocus. The smell of the earth is good. It is apparent that there is no death. But what does that signify? Not only underground are the brains of men eaten by maggots. Life in itself is nothing. An empty cup, a flight of uncarpeted stairs. It is not enough that yearly down this hill, April comes like an idiot, babbling and strewing flowers.
Thank you.
I'll jump in here. I was always a little bit shy when it came to the readings. So oftentimes I'd reach out to the things that were most profound to me. And a lot of them came from some of those small bookmarks or hats. In fact, I actually have my hat here. Advice from a wetland, which to me is most appropriate for connecting to Turtle Marsh. Advice from a wetland: make a splash, take time to reflect, don't get bogged down, and what's the rush?
If I may go, Tom. Thank you, Laura. I'd like to share a couple of excerpts from a local author out of Chicago, born in 1930. So when he started, he was 3 years old during the Conservation Corps. His name is Shel Silverstein. You might be familiar with his work called The Giving Tree. And I just think it's a lovely, lovely, some say children's book, some say it's a metaphor, some say it's a parable, some say it's an interpretation of the gift of giving, another's capacity to love. Could be a cautionary tale about environmental exploitation, or maybe a story about Mother Nature and the relation with humanity. Or, as I mentioned, maybe a modern day parable of mutual responsibility. So the narrator starts out by saying, once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. And the tree says, come, boy, come and climb up my trunk and swing through my branches and eat my apples and play in my shade and be happy. And then later on, after the boy does that, the tree says, I have no house. The forest is my house. But you may cut off my branches and build a house. Then you will be happy. And then again, the boy does all of that. And then the tree later on says, because the boy, like, what else can you provide? And the tree says, I cut down my trunk and make a boat. And then you can sail away and be happy. And the same thing happens. The boy leaves and comes back. Tree says, I have only leaves and apples. Take my apples, boy, and sell them in the city. Then you will have money and you will be happy. The narrator says, but the boy stayed away for a long time. And when he came back, the tree was so happy she could hardly speak. The tree said, I am sorry, boy, but I have nothing left to give you. And the narrator then says she loved the boy very, very much, even more than she loved herself. And the boy responds to her, I am too old and sad to play. The tree sighs and says, I am sorry. I wish I could give you something, but I have nothing left. I'm just an old stump. And the boy then says, I don't need very much now, just a quiet place to sit and rest. I am very tired. So I'd like to leave you with the question, what do you suppose happened next? You'll have to read the book to figure that out, or you can add your own ending. There have been multiple endings actually written, some happier than others, I guess. Back
Thank
to
you,
you, Tom.
John. I'm going to have to change to this presenter view. My own contribution, it's a very short poem, but I think it was one that I used during one of the early weekends of restoration. I used it again at the very end, but I wanted to read it again, and because it just so much captures my sense of what the work meant. And I use work in a very positive sense. It's a poem by Wendell Berry. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. That when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. And it always felt like a prayer reading that, and I suspect it is in many ways. But the first four lines are paradoxical, that you only know your real work when you don't know what to do or where to go, and the literary device is called either oxymoron or oxymoron. It's just self-contradiction. The last two lines provide that connection between confusion and understanding. When he says, the mind that is not baffled is not employed, and the impeded stream is the one that sings. I mean, our real life is to protect those vulnerable people, community, places, and ideas we love. Yet because we are flawed mortal beings, and this comes with conservationists who work on landscapes that are forever changing and will change beyond us, that all of our efforts today we don't know where the future lies. And we can never do it perfectly or in perpetuity. We make mistakes. We're incapable of perfect love. All we can do is commit ourselves unconditionally to a cause, a person, a community, and try to figure out each day, despite being baffled and impeded, what that love means. That is true for me. It's true as a conservationist. It's true as a husband and father. All you can do is your best and try to actuate that love that's inside of you. If our tasks were simple and easy, if logic always told us what to do, love would be unnecessary. And I think that to me captured an essential part of the weekend of restoration, the experience of working with people, of working together toward a common cause. That was what it meant for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your experiences and how that event was set up and your personal reflections on it too. This time, if anybody would like to ask questions, just to remind you, you can unmute yourself up at the top right using that microphone icon, or you can put it in the chat and we can ask for you. So we'll hang out a little bit here and have plenty of time for questions.
Well, I'll just say that it was a real privilege to work with Tom, with John and Laura and Tricia, and with so many of the volunteers and participants in the weekends of restoration. It really was about community building, not just the learning, not just the work, but the connections. And this is why our final weekend of restoration was themed relationships, because it really has always been about how we relate to one another as we together relate to the land. So I want to thank Tom and Jackie for making all of this possible, and for my other colleagues and those of you who have participated in the weekends over the years. Again, it's just been a privilege.
About the community thing, that was for many years. I keep asking myself where conservation can go, and I'm trained as a scientist and ecologist, and I suppose in some ways I'm most comfortable dealing with facts and figures and numbers, but I don't think that tells us where the future of conservation is, and I think it is our moral relationship to the world and to each other that tells us where the future of conservation is. And I think you can develop those moral relationships in community. You can't really do that by yourself sitting in a basement thinking about things. I can crunch numbers. I can think about oak reproduction, which I've worked a lot on. But those are things in a physical world. The future of conservation is about is about shifting those moral relationships of the community people to the land and to each other. And I truly believe that the future of conservation is in community building. And I'm very serious about that. I'm very excited. We're starting out with our stewardship program now, of trying to incorporate more of a community approach to our stewardship. And then that was really the goal of the weekend. And the special thing about each weekend was the little micro mini communities that formed in a matter of just 2 days, and how that completely changed my relationship to them in working with them, and they working with each other. That, I mean, I've said this lots of times. When I teach a workshop, everyone looks at me. I'm the knowledge person, and I'm handing out knowledge, and they ask questions to me, and then I answer their questions. But as soon as you've had one work day together, one day of, or even a few hours of work together, they look to each other. It's not everyone looking at me. They're working with and looking to each other and talking to each other. And that totally changes the culture of the weekend. And I think and yes, there were very short-lived little communities, but each one of them was real. I was there. It was real. And you could see that the effect on the people that were in the room and how they related to one another. And I think taking that idea and finding how it can be expanded and moved into the future is what I'm interested in as a conservationist and an educator.
We had a question in the chat from Anne. Tom, has your muse suggested your next step?
Well, the next step will involve many of the things that were in the weekend. We'll do some shorter programs that will combine education and work activities. I've sort of semi-planned a couple of them, but we'll definitely do at least 2 of them this summer. You'll know about it. And I want to just try a few things and try and see where we can go with that. I love the weekend of restoration, but this is the first spring since the spring of 2012, I think, since I've been able to really get involved in a lot of other departmental activities, because the build up to the spring, the 2 busiest times of year, I was involved in planning and execution of the weekend of restoration, which was huge and important and deeply satisfying activity. But it did mean I couldn't really be involved in anything else that was going on in the department for that month coming up to it, and for at least a few days after it, as I just dug myself out from under the pile. So I'm enjoying working with stewards more now. So I'm not. My life as an educator isn't over yet, and that life will continue as long as I'm eating and breathing and my heart is beating. So I'll be back. It's just a matter of the format. We're just trying some things now in this next summer, and your comments and suggestions are always welcome. If you have your idea should be wild and crazy and involve maybe lightsabers and rubber balls and dart guns and flying a kite in Glacial Park, things like that. Nothing is too crazy. So if you have any good ideas, just let me know.
Any other questions out there, or anybody who wants to share a reflection from having attended a weekend of restoration in the past?
Well, I want to thank you for coming today. It was a pleasure giving a presentation and an opportunity to reflect on a program that meant a lot to me, and to try, inadequate as it was, try to articulate what was behind it and what I felt like in doing it. If I could total up all the hours for 25 weekends of restoration, I don't know how, like one of those things, if each hour was an inch and the string, how far would the string reach to the moon or back, moon and back? I don't know, but it was huge and important activity to me. It was something that was satisfying. One thing about your life as a teacher is that when people leave the room, if your life is building a bridge, when you finish the bridge is there and you can go look at it the next day. When people leave the room, when you're a teacher, all you can do is yeah, have faith that the work made a difference, and I hope it made a difference for those of you who are in the weekends. And yeah, that was kind of my final thoughts on the weekend. Anyway, thank you so much for coming today. And most of those names I'm familiar with, so you can reach me at any time. You know my district email, and give me your wild and crazy ideas. Thank you. Guess we've lost Jackie also. So
Oh
there you
dear.
go. So
Yeah.
she will put the recording up there. It went well. I'm pleased. I
It's
will
still recording, Tom. It's still recording.
well, we need
Yeah, we're still on record.
Yeah, you just um,
has the recording stopped yet?
no. Well, maybe Jackie can edit it, but you did a great job. It was really fun. It's
Okay.
very heartwarming to
Uh,
just look back to it and reflect on it. Really, it was
Yeah,
very
we'll
fun.
have many opportunities to reflect on it. I'm too tired emotionally and otherwise to think about it now, but we need to have another meeting here soon to decide about the future of conservation in the world. Just the five of us. So yeah.
Yeah, it was great. It was good
All
fun.
right. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for helping
Thank
out
you,
today.
Tom.
And
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks to
Tom.
all of you.
All
I will
right.
be seeing you. I
I
will be
really
seeing you
enjoyed
soon.
this.
All right. Can't wait.
Same here. You have a good one. Thanks.